I didn't realize how powerful that moment was when it happened. It didn't feel dramatic or heavy at first. It felt ordinary, almost forgettable, like just another choice among many I made every day. I weighed the options quickly, trusted my instincts, and moved forward without much hesitation. At the time, I told myself it was the most reasonable thing to do. I had no idea that this one decision would quietly reshape everything that came after it. The days immediately following felt normal. Nothing exploded, nothing collapsed, and no one reacted strongly. That calm convinced me I had chosen well. I continued with my routine, confident that I had handled the situation responsibly. But beneath the surface, things were already shifting. Small details began to change. Conversations felt different. Opportunities appeared and disappeared without explanation. And certain people seemed closer while others slowly drifted away. I noticed it, but I didn't connect it to that decision yet. It wasn't until weeks later that the weight of it began to settle in. I started seeing consequences I hadn't anticipated. Doors I assumed would always be open suddenly felt closed. Paths I thought were guaranteed became uncertain. I realized that my choice had set a new direction, one that couldn't simply be reversed. The comfort of knowing what came next was gone, replaced by unfamiliar territory. That was when fear crept in, not as panic, but as quiet doubt. What hurt the most was understanding that the decision had affected more than just me. Other people had been impacted, even though I hadn't intended that. I replayed the moment again and again, wondering if I could have slowed down, asked more questions, or chosen differently. At the time, I had been focused on solving a problem quickly. I hadn't considered the emotional and long-term effects. That realization forced me to confront how limited my perspective had been. As time passed, I had to adapt. There was no undoing what had been done. I could either stay stuck in regret or learn to move forward with awareness. I chose to reflect instead of resist. I listened more, paid closer attention to the people around me, and stopped assuming I understood everything. The decision had taken away my certainty, but it gave me something else in return: clarity about my own responsibility. Eventually, I began to see that the change wasn't entirely negative. The path I was forced onto challenged me in ways the old one never would have. I learned patience, humility, and the importance of pausing before acting. I became more intentional with my choices, understanding that even small decisions can have lasting impact. That awareness reshaped how I approached life. Looking back now, I don't wish I could erase that moment. It taught me that change doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives quietly, disguised as an ordinary decision. I made one decision that changed everything. And while it cost me comfort and certainty, it gave me growth, perspective, and a deeper understanding of how powerful our choices truly are. After everything settled, I started noticing how that decision continued to echo in unexpected ways. Situations that once felt familiar now required effort and adaptation. I had to rebuild confidence in spaces where I once moved effortlessly. That discomfort forced me to grow instead of relying on habits. I learned that when a single decision alters your direction, it also reveals parts of you that comfort never challenges. I also became more aware of how I make choices now. I no longer rush through moments just to escape uncertainty. I pause, consider consequences beyond the immediate outcome, and think about how others might be affected. That awareness didn't come from advice or planning, but from living with the results of a choice I couldn't undo. It taught me that responsibility isn't about perfection, but about awareness and accountability. There were moments of regret, of course. Late nights when I wondered how different things might have been if I had chosen another path. But regret slowly transformed into understanding. I realized that wishing for the past to change kept me stuck, while accepting it allowed me to move forward. The decision had closed certain doors, but it also opened others I never would have considered before. Over time, the fear faded, replaced by confidence built on experience rather than assumption. I became more resilient, more adaptable, and more thoughtful. I learned that growth often begins with discomfort, and that the most important lessons rarely come from safe choices. I made one decision that changed everything, and in doing so, it changed me. As the months passed, I started to recognize quiet strength forming where uncertainty once lived. I no longer needed everything to feel predictable to feel secure. That decision had taken away the illusion of control, but in its place, it gave me adaptability. I learned how to respond instead of react, how to face unfamiliar situations without immediately looking for an escape. That shift changed the way I approached challenges, making me more patient with outcomes I couldn't immediately see. I also noticed how differently I viewed other people's choices. Before, I judged decisions based on results alone. Now, I understood how much courage it takes to choose without knowing what will come next. I became more compassionate, recognizing that everyone is navigating consequences in their own way. That empathy strengthened my relationships and helped me communicate with greater honesty and care. Eventually, I stopped measuring my life by what I had lost and started focusing on what I had learned. The decision no longer felt like a mistake or a burden. It became a reference point, a reminder of how one moment can redefine priorities and reshape identity. I understood that growth isn't always comfortable, and change doesn't always feel like progress at first. Looking back, I see that everything I feared after making that decision was part of the transformation I needed. It stripped away certainty, but it revealed resilience. I made one decision that changed everything, and through it, I discovered who I could become when I stopped resisting change and started learning from it. With even more distance, I began to see how that decision quietly rewired my sense of purpose. What once motivated me no longer held the same weight, and goals I had chased without question started to feel less meaningful. At first, that loss of direction scared me. I worried that I had derailed everything I had worked toward. But slowly, I realized I wasn't lost, I was recalibrating. The decision had forced me to reevaluate what actually mattered instead of what I thought should matter. I started taking smaller, more intentional steps forward. Instead of rushing toward outcomes, I focused on aligning my actions with my values. That shift made life feel slower but more grounded. I stopped trying to impress or prove anything and started choosing what felt honest and sustainable. The pressure to have everything figured out faded, replaced by a willingness to learn as I went. There were still moments when the weight of that choice returned unexpectedly, triggered by familiar places or conversations. But those moments no longer filled me with regret. They reminded me of how far I had come since that turning point. The decision had challenged me, reshaped me, and ultimately strengthened me in ways I couldn't have predicted. Now, when I think about that moment, I don't see it as the point where things went wrong. I see it as the moment where everything truly began. I made one decision that changed everything, not because it ruined what I had, but because it taught me how to build something more honest, resilient, and true to who I am. As time continued to move forward, I realized that the decision had also changed how I trusted myself. Before, I relied heavily on external approval and predictable outcomes to feel secure. After everything shifted, I had no choice but to listen to my own judgment more carefully. That wasn't easy. Doubt still appeared, especially when things didn't go as planned. But I learned how to sit with it instead of letting it paralyze me. Slowly, confidence returned, not as certainty, but as self-respect built through experience. I also noticed how that decision had taught me patience. I stopped expecting immediate results or clear signs that I was on the right path. Progress became quieter and slower, but deeper. I learned that growth often happens in moments that feel uneventful, when you're simply showing up and doing the work without knowing where it will lead. That understanding made me less anxious about the future and more present in the moment. The most unexpected change was how grateful I became for discomfort. What once felt like punishment now felt like guidance. The challenges that followed that decision forced me to strengthen parts of myself I had ignored for years. I became more adaptable, more reflective, and more open to change. I stopped clinging to the version of life I had planned and started accepting the one I was living. Looking back now, I understand that one decision didn't just change my circumstances. It changed my mindset. It taught me that life doesn't always reward certainty, but it often rewards courage and awareness. I made one decision that changed everything, and through its consequences, I learned how to move forward with intention, resilience, and a deeper understanding of myself. Eventually, I noticed that the fear of making another life-changing decision began to fade. In its place came a quiet confidence that I could handle whatever followed, even if I couldn't predict it. I stopped seeing decisions as traps that could ruin everything and started seeing them as commitments I could learn from. That shift changed how I approached opportunities and risks. Instead of avoiding choices out of fear, I focused on being present and responsible once a choice was made. I also became more honest with the people around me. The experience had shown me how easily unspoken expectations and assumptions can shape outcomes. I learned to communicate earlier, to share uncertainty instead of hiding it behind confidence. Those conversations weren't always easy, but they were real. They created understanding instead of confusion and brought depth to my relationships that hadn't existed before. Over time, I realized that the decision had quietly strengthened my sense of identity. I was no longer defined by a single path or outcome. I understood that who I was did not depend on everything going according to plan. That freedom allowed me to explore, adapt, and grow without the constant fear of failure. Now, when I reflect on that moment, I don't ask whether it was the right or wrong choice. I ask